The old building loomed over him, dark and silent against the bruised sky. Every window seemed to stare back with hollow eyes. Even the gnarled trees surrounding it whispered secrets best left buried. When Leo first arrived at the old boarding school in the woods, he felt something strange, like the walls themselves were watching him. The headmaster, a thin man with eyes like faded photographs, had welcomed him with a tight smile. "You're our newest student, aren't you, Leo? Come inside before nightfall. These woods can be dangerous after dark." His words hung in the air like a half-forgotten warning. As dusk bled into night, casting long shadows across the peeling paint and cobwebs, Leo found himself in a maze of echoing hallways. The air grew colder with every step. The whispers started then, soft murmurs that seemed to cling to the corners of his ears. They followed him down corridors, up creaking staircases, always just beyond his sight. At first they were faint, like the rustling of leaves in a distant forest. But as the nights deepened, the whispers grew bolder, weaving tales of sorrow and despair. The other students spoke of it in hushed tones, their faces pale in the flickering lamplight. "Room 13, they'd say, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and reverence. "They say it's cursed, that those who enter never come out the same." But Leo wasn't so sure about that. The whispers seemed to come from that room, weaving tales of sorrow and despair. He tried to focus on his lessons, on the stern lectures and the musty textbooks, but the whispers wormed their way into his thoughts, becoming a constant refrain. He began to see shadows in the periphery of his vision, fleeting glimpses of movement in the dead of night. Sleep offered no escape, for even in his dreams the whispers echoed, pulling him toward the forbidden room. Then, one night, the whispers changed. They morphed into a mournful song, a lullaby laced with longing. And at the very end of the hallway, almost inaudible above the rest, he thought he heard his name. Curiosity gnawed at him, a relentless hunger for answers. That night, when the other students were tucked away in their beds, their snores a dull hum in the darkness, Leo slipped out. Armed with only a flashlight, its feeble beam a meager defense against the enveloping gloom, he moved like a phantom through the silent halls. Each step echoed in the stillness, a drumbeat in the symphony of the night. The closer he got to room 13, the louder the voice became, rising and falling like the tide, ebbing and flowing with a rhythm all its own. Fear pricked at him, cold and sharp, yet the pull towards the room was stronger. As he stood before the weathered door, the whispers coalesced into a single sound, a beckoning that seemed to tug at his very soul. With a deep breath, he reached for the doorknob, its surface cold and damp under his trembling fingers. It turned with a sound like shattering glass, and the door creaked open, revealing a room untouched by time. In the center, a single desk held an open book, its pages fluttering gently despite the stillness of the air. Around it, shadows danced in the flickering light, lending life to dust motes swirling in the air. He stepped inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something akin to old parchment and forgotten dreams. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw more clearly. The room was filled with dusty furniture, a wardrobe, a vanity, a chair, all draped in the finest linens as if awaiting the return of their owner. On the desk lay a quill and ink, and on the wall, a portrait of a young girl with haunting green eyes stared back at him, and then he saw it, floating above the desk, a book. It glowed softly, its pages turning slowly in the silence. Hesitantly, he approached, drawn to it as if by an invisible thread. As he touched the cover, the whispering began again, this time a torrent of voices, overlapping, urgent, desperate. Startled, he pulled away, his heart pounding in his chest. But the whispering continued, growing louder, more insistent. Gathering his courage, he opened the book. Its pages were filled with spidery writing, each word a brushstroke, painting a vivid picture of a life lived, loved, and lost. As he read, The whispers subsided, replaced by the gentle rustling of turning pages. He read of a student named Sam, his days filled with laughter and learning, his evenings spent with friends. He read of his kindness, his compassion, his unwavering spirit. But there was a darkness lurking beneath those pages, a shadow that fell across Sam's life. He read of whispers, of rumors that painted Sam in sinister colors, twisting his every action, every word, every glance. The pages grew heavier, the writing more frantic as Sam's world began to crumble around him. Then abruptly, the entries stopped. There was no resolution, no explanation. Just a single sentence that cut like a shard of glass. I am afraid they will find me wanting, that my absence will become a gaping wound in their memories. The last entry ended abruptly, leaving Sam's fate a haunting question mark. Was he still there, trapped within these four walls, his spirit tethered to the place he once called home? Suddenly, the room shifted. The air crackled with energy, and the scent of old books was replaced by the sweet aroma of apples and cinnamon. Before him, the desk and the wardrobe solidified, taking on the appearance of well-loved furniture rather than dusty relics. And then he saw him, sitting at the desk, a boy no older than 12, with kind eyes and a mop of unruly brown hair. He looked up, a tentative smile gracing his lips. "Who are you?" Leo asked, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent room. The boy hesitated, his eyes clouding with a deep sadness. "My name is Sam," he whispered, his voice like the rustle of autumn leaves. "And this was my room." As he spoke, the portrait on the wall flickered, revealing not a painted image, but a reflection of the boy himself. It was then that Leo realized he wasn't dealing with a ghost. Not in the traditional sense. This was a soul tethered to the living, bound by unfinished business to the place it once called home. Sam looked at him, his eyes pleading. "Can you help me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. And Leo knew what he had to do. He sat down at the desk, the worn wood smooth and comforting under his fingertips. Together, they spent the night reading the book, sharing stories and laughter. As the first rays of sunlight touched the dusty floorboards, Leo felt a profound shift. The room no longer felt like a prison, but a sanctuary. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a profound silence that spoke volumes. When he woke up the next morning, the whispers had vanished. The room was empty, the book closed, the pages no longer glowing. He searched for Sam, for any sign that he'd ever been there, but there was nothing. It was as if he'd never existed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Life at the boarding school settled into a familiar rhythm. But something had changed in Leo. He saw the whispers now, not as eerie echoes, but as fragments of stories waiting to be heard. He began to share Sam's tale, not in hushed tones, but with quiet pride, making sure that Sam's memory lived on, that his kindness and warmth were remembered. As he spoke, he could almost feel Sam's presence beside him, a comforting weight, a silent thank you. And so Leo's journey taught him that sometimes the scariest things are just stories, waiting to be heard, that the monsters under our beds are often shadows cast by the light of day, and that the most haunting whispers are those that yearn to be understood.